Welcome on this second Sunday of Easter and looking at also at Anzac Day. And I'm just going to explore that thing. Where does Jesus fit into Anzac Day? And there are any number of places. We're going to explore a couple in this sermon. And as part of Anzac, there's always been military chaplains. Here's a conversation across as a young man's leaning on the ship's rail on a slow journey to head to the Middle East in World War II. You know, Padre, I want to come out of this clean because I've got to live with myself when the war finishes. We're going to look at a Salvation Army man, Albert Moore, and his helper, Jock Ingalls, another Salvation Army. Albert signed up as a Salvation Army chaplain and was sent to the Middle East. So he worked in Palestine, Egypt and Libya, and he provided comfort at the front lines. And he had this van that he bought with funds from the New South Wales Golfers Association. And he'd drive as close as he could, bringing a hot cuppa, and also, if it was time for the BBC News Bulletin, he'd tune that in and people would love to listen to it. Now that photo on the left is a stage photo because often he's driving at night with no headlights over chicken wire laid over the sand dunes to get close to where the troops are on the front lines. He'd pull up, blow a whistle, and then out of the foxholes people would pop, and they'd pop up and come and have a hot cuppa. And he'd serve 30 or 40 gallons at a time. This is pre-metric, in a couple of urns that he wrapped in blankets, and then when he'd finish one night he'd drive back and do another run if he had time. And the troops really valued that. Then let's move to PNG, Papua New Guinea and Kokoda in 1942. So the Japanese have swept through Southeast Asia. They've captured Singapore, which was supposedly impregnable. They've ripped through Indonesia, and now they've landed in Papua New Guinea. They've taken over Rabaul, and they've landed on the north coast of Papua and New Guinea, and they're crossing over through the jungle. And Australians are terrified, and suddenly it's desperate defence. And the 39th Battalion, poorly trained, are set up from southern parts of Australia, from Melbourne, and they're sent up to Port Moresby, and then they're shoved onto the Kokoda Trail. They hadn't been properly trained for jungle warfare. They learnt very, very quickly, and it's desperate action. The Japanese troops are better equipped and more used to jungle fighting, so it's contact, spread, withdraw, contact, spread, withdraw. And these young troops and couple of 40-year-olds are desperately trying to protect territory and slow the advance. The Japanese actually got to within the city lights to be able to see the glow of the lights from Port Moresby. But by that stage, their support lines were so stretched out they actually didn't have the capacity, but there's no way people knew that, and it's desperate defence. Also, some of the key people here are the local people who brought in provisions and helped carry out the sick. And they were called the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels by the Aussie troops and highly regarded. So Albert Moore is sent from the Middle East up to Kokoda. And here he is serving out a hot cuppa to men of the 39th as they've come out of the jungle in a mess. And the Salvo set up these little things called the hop-in centres, comfort centres for the troops. I know the nicest thing I've ever had on the Kokoda Trail was a cup of tea given to me by the Salvation Army. And I hated tea that never had milk or sugar in it. This didn't have any in it, and I loved it. I wanted more. I had half a cup, that's all they had. I never forgot that one. So those simple things were so important. And Albert Moore he just wants to be there as close as he can. A fascination for me in trying to do what I could for men who are making such tremendous sacrifices under most terrible conditions. So there he is, setting up a place where they can write a letter and send it home, where they can have a cuppa. And when that 39th emerged from the jungle, about to be replaced by the fresh troops, Albert had been told there was no hot food for them, so he did what he could quickly to make a makeshift fire and a camp out of biscuit tins, a camp oven, and get something hot to give to the troops. And he reports in his biography, there were two questions or two things I'd always request from him. The first was, will you say a little prayer for me? The second thing was, can you guess, looking at the photo there, the second thing was, have you got a smoke on you? So they were asking for a cigarette. And he reports that when he first got up there on the Kokoda Trail, he laid out his supply of cigarettes for the people, for the local, at that staging station where he was. And the troops there said, "Oh, leave them for the fellows coming out. They'll need them more than I do." And the fellows coming out, who were in a desperate way, had been battling the Japanese for a couple of months in all sorts of conditions. Their clothes are falling off them, they're sick and whatever else. The fellows coming out invariably said, "Oh, leave them for the chappies going in. They'll need them more than I will." Fascinating. Let's jump now to women in war. The Australian Army nurses after the fall of Singapore. This is Sister Vivian Bullwinkle. She was one of the last evacuees with other army nurses and people from Singapore. The ship sunk. They end up on Bunker Island, and large group of men, large group of women, a lot of army nurses, and they go to give themselves over to the Japanese. The Japanese come in, march the men around the headland. The women can hear shots. They know what's going to happen to them. They're made to walk into the water and they're gunned down from behind. And Vivian miraculously survives. She's been shot right through, and you can see her army nurse uniform at the Australian War Memorial with the bullet hole in it. She just lies there in the water as still as she possibly can, and then when they finally leave, she emerges. She finds a young wounded English soldier, and she's looking after him in the trees just above the beach. She goes to the local village. They reluctantly give her some food and say, "We're not going to do any more for you, because if we do, the Japanese will kill us." So she doesn't know what to do. She gets down on her knees on the beach and she prays, even though she wasn't a woman of faith and certainly wasn't a regular church attender. And she hears God say, "God helps those who help themselves." And that's not in the scriptures, but that was the message from the Holy Spirit. You've got to do something. You've got to take action. So she bravely goes to the nearest Japanese to hand her and her wounded English soldier in. She's imprisoned, and that's where she stays till for the rest of the war. There's a lovely film from 1997, Paradise Road, talking about these women, Dutch, English, and the Australian Army nurses who were prisoners of war in Sumatra. Horrific situation they were in. And one of the wonderful things they do, and you can see it in the top right hand there, after Christmas in 1943, they put together a vocal orchestra. They don't have any instruments, and they're just humming or oohing and ahhing vocal parts. Of the 30 people singing, only 6 could read music, so it's been a very careful preparation. Australian Army nurse Betty Jeffrey says, "This is the most wonderful thing I've ever done, and it lifted everyone's spirits." Two of the people responsible for this were an English missionary from Singapore, Miss Margaret Dryburgh, and she was always referred to as Miss Dryburgh. The other was Nora Chambers, a graduate from the Royal Academy of Music. They put the music together, and Margaret also ran church every Sunday. She wrote a hymn that they would sing every week, the Captives' Hymn. Here's a couple of verses. "Give us patience to endure. Keep our hearts serene and pure. Grant us courage, charity, greater faith, humility, readiness to own thy will, be we free or captive still." For our loved ones we would pray, be their guardians night and day. From all dangers keep them free, banish all anxiety. May they trust us to thy care, know that thou our pain dost share. And a little story about a 12-year-old Dutch girl, Bet. She's lost both her parents, and somehow she's got maggots. Flies have laid eggs in her hair. They've hatched. She's got live maggots crawling around, and she's got an older woman who's not her grandma dealing with it by dipping a rag into boiling water and then putting it on and trying to kill the maggots that way. And Betty's screaming. Vivian's walking past, hears a child screaming and marches in and takes over the care from this older woman, and also informs the older woman, Betty will be coming to report to me every day. So she's protecting this 12-year-old. Much later, after they've been there a couple of years, the situation's terrible. They've had to shift yet again. They had 4 shifts the whole time. The Japanese haven't given them any good food the whole time. Sanitation's terrible. So they're sick and they're starting to die. And Vivian gets seriously ill. And Betty asks Vivian's friends, what can I do? What she does is take her one precious gold bangle, the only thing she has remaining from her mother. She's kept it safe this whole time. She negotiates with a friendly prison guard. She sells the bangle in exchange for 12 limes, and she gives the limes to the other nurses, and they help to get Vivian through. And Vivian and Bet remain friends until Vivian's death in 2000. Let's jump to our gospel reading. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked. So they gathered together with the doors locked. Now, where's the last room where they'd all been together? And if you're thinking of all the horrific events of Good Friday and Saturday, where was their safe, happy place to be? I suspect it's the upper room where they last met with Jesus. So they're gathered in the room of the Last Supper. And that's so important. Good Friday is somber and serious. And that's really important for us. And our whole Lutheran theology is based on this is where we get to meet God. And this is where we don't have to dress up or be right or be perfect or be good. This is where we know God is with us and knows us and deals with our pain. But it's a meal that Jesus gives us is what enlivens us each and every week. And Jesus doesn't take the disciples and the believers back to the site of the crucifixion. He comes and meets them at the site where he's just given himself to them in that Passover meal, and that he's changed now the new covenant. This is my body given for you. This is my blood shed for you for the forgiveness of sins. And this is where we meet the Easter Jesus every week too. This is where he said to them, I no longer call you servants, but you're now my friends. And this meal is about service, it's about thanksgiving, it's about being together, it's about being equal. Remember how Jesus is so good at table fellowship, and that so horrifies the serious religious people. He eats with sinners and tax collectors, and that's good news for us. So this Easter, we remember Jesus comes and reappears to the disciples, not at the site of the crucifixion, but at the site of the Last Supper. Eating together, being together, Thanksgiving, that's so important, and that's what keeps us going. So where does Jesus fit into Anzac Day? Through those themes of sacrifice, through the themes of love, and through the themes of service, and through the themes of finding enough food to get through each day. And how does he meet us? Also in those things and in the Lord's Supper that's so precious and so vital.